Well, welcome everyone. It's February 2nd, 2025, and we are here for another episode of Rough Cuts. And I'm Nate in Cardboard Veritas on IG, and I am excited to be here with my usual co-hosts, Matthew, 1956 Tops Guy, and Jonathan, Sports Cards and Sunsets. And we are extremely excited to be joined tonight by Tony, Southern Collector 14, on Instagram and on YouTube. And I think we have a really fun topic tonight that we're all excited to talk about. We're gonna geek out a little bit here on some pre-war baseball stuff, pre-war baseball card stuff as well. And you know, guys don't do too much in the way of book clubs, but this is maybe about as close as we get. And, this is one that we've all spent a little bit of time talking about. And, I think we're excited to have a really good conversation here tonight. So welcome, fellas.
I got my copy right here. I'm excited. Let's go.
All right. Let's see. We all have the same one, too.
It's a book club.
Let's go. That's right. That's right. So, Tony, thank you for joining us. We're really excited to have you on. You have joined the vintage Instagram community here over the last year or two, and I think we'd all agree that you've been one of the most exciting additions to that community, and you've come in with a lot of passion and a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of great vibes, and we've all really appreciated that. And I in particular love when I see that you post a new card, because I know you're going to share a really interesting story with it and a personal connection, and really make that post and that card come to life. And that's one of the things that I enjoy most about this community and about about the folks on Instagram. So we're excited to have you, and I know you have done some other content recently, and in particular you were on the Stacking Slabs podcast last week, and I got a chance to check that out, and you did a terrific job of talking about vintage collecting, and and I think it was great to hear your story there, and I recommend that everyone check out that podcast. And then I also strongly recommend that folks check out your YouTube channel, where you've been doing some wonderful episodes. And I think one of your tremendous strengths is in storytelling, and we're going to be talking a lot tonight about storytelling. That's really kind of the focus of this episode. So with that, again, welcome. And could you maybe tell us a little bit? I know I can direct folks to Stacking Slabs for a good full collector bio on you, but can you tell us a little bit about your collecting journey and your involvement with the Instagram community and what you're doing on YouTube as well?
Yeah, definitely. So I got into collecting as a kid, just like everybody else, and then went off to college and kind of dropped it for a while. I would still go to the occasional card show and get some autographs. I really like getting those. I had a good friend of mine, him and his dad collected, and they like to collect autographs. So I would go with them, but I kept all my stuff. And so there's a couple of forks in the roads in my journey. The first one was I was on Instagram and had my personal Instagram page, and we had a local card show or local card shop that guy would do some posts, and it got me interested again, and that got me to a card show in Nashville. There's two big ones every year. One, it's called the National, and I went to the one in the fall on a Friday afternoon and walked in there and saw my first slabbed card. So I had never seen a slabbed card, a graded card before. And so I've told this story over and over again, so I'm not going to go into a bunch of detail, but basically that got me back in, and I started collecting. I did a couple of player runs. I did a Hank Aaron run, which was very meaningful for me because I really respect the man and what he did. Then embarked on a Mickey Mantle run. Now, in the middle of all that, I felt like I was collecting in a vacuum. I didn't have any collecting friends. I was trying to talk my best friend, the guy I used to go to card shows with as a kid. I was trying to talk him into getting back into it, and he had all his stuff. Him and his dad amassed this amazing autograph collection of cards and balls and bats and all kinds of stuff. And so anyways, I, I, you guys, so there's forks in the road. There was the guy with the local card shop, and his post got me to a card show. You guys were the next fork, like you three and Luke Bleecker Street. Somehow, by following that card shop, you guys got into my algorithm. And I remember Nate in particular, and I remember Matthew and Jonathan and y'all's post, and then Luke's. And I thought, man, this is so cool. Like, they ain't going by their name. They got like, it's a card post. And man, I could do that. So I had to figure out how to have two different identities. I had Tony Liebrick identity, and I had to think up a name. So that was kind of cool. My two daughters in particular, they approved of the Southern Collector name, and somebody already had Southern Collector. So my number in baseball at the time was 14. So I threw 14 on the end of it, and it worked. Nobody had that. And so I did that. And so by following you guys, that got me into there. And then I discovered this community, and me and you guys would DM each other, and you would like a post, and we'd converse. And all of a sudden I was in a community, and it made it so much more rewarding in my collecting journey. Then I happened on YouTube, and I started watching YouTube channels, and I would learn more about cards. And the one in particular that I really loved watching, I didn't miss an episode, and I still don't to this day, is Greg Miller's Midlife Card YouTube channel. And I met him at the National, and he was instrumental in me starting a YouTube channel. He was really that was the third fork, right? So he was really instrumental in kind of pushing me, and I'm not really tech savvy. So when I would have questions, I could text him, he'd give me his phone number. Or I could text him, he could answer my questions. And he told me at one point, like, dude, I sent him a couple of, I did a video of just me talking. He said, dude, you're a great storyteller. He said, but you can't look at the screen on your phone. You got to look at the little green light, because it looks like you're not looking. So it's little tips like that. And so now people don't realize it, but when you do a YouTube video, I do a ring light. I'm doing this on my laptop, but I'll have my phone there, and I got to look at that. I'm sitting there talking just like I'm having a conversation with the green light, and there's nobody in the room. So if you watch the first couple of my videos, it's very impersonal, and you see me pausing in between words, and I talk because I'm trying to think. But after you do it a while, I'm looking at the green light on my laptop right now. I can look right at that green light, and it's a person, and I can just get out there and have a personality. So yeah, it's something I've had to learn, but I'm enjoying it. And so just like the Instagram, it's something, it doesn't cost me any money. It gives me community. I've met a lot of really cool people. I've got a group of guys in the YouTube community that we text every day. We're in a text group. And I told them today, I seem like I talk to them more than I do my wife some days. So it's really enriched my collecting journey. So anybody out there that's watching this, well, if you are, you're already into this stuff. But, I've told people, do an Instagram deal. Just do it with a card page, and you'll be surprised how much community you'll get out of that. You ain't got to start a YouTube channel or anything like that. But if that's something you want to do, jump out there. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. I got a question for you, Tony.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you were collecting as a kid, what was your relationship to like vintage cards? Like, did you collect older cards? Like, what'd you think of them?
Yeah. So I talked about that a little bit in my last YouTube video. I talked about why vintage. So nowadays, I think I'm not a modern collector per se. I'll bust open a hobby box every year and just see what I can get just for fun. But they're chasing stuff. They're like the Paul Skeens patch card. A couple years ago was the Tom Brady baseball card. It's always something like that. And if you can hit that card, it's like scratch off. You're gonna get a lottery win. Well, back when we collected as kids, we didn't have that option. Ours was, we would get the Beckett magazines, and it usually had a Gowdy Babe Ruth on it, or it had a 52 Mantle, or it had a T206 Honus Wagner, or I had a Ty Cobb card. And that was our pinnacle. And so that was what I always looked to one day get to. That was my peak. And so, yeah, I've got a 52 or a 1959 mantle that I've had since I was 12 years old. My little league coach gave me. And when I was 14, he came to a mall 15 minutes from my house in Nashville and would sign 2 items for free. He took an appearance fee, and it was an grand opening. And he was there one night. Herschel Walker was there the next night, is when he played for the New Jersey Generals. And so I got a Herschel Walker autograph. But yeah, I stood there in front of Mantle. He signed that 59 Mantle, and I still have it. I got it graded at the National this year, and it got a 9 grade. Yeah, I think it was a 3, or no, it was a 4 and a 9 on the signature. So yeah, so I've always wanted vintage. I remember when I was in 7th grade, there was this kid named Jim Hupka at school, and his dad had been a Major League Baseball scout. And one day, Jim just comes into school, man. He's got a binder of 1955 complete set. And when I was in 7th grade, this would have been 1980, 81. And I remember flipping through that, and I was in awe of all these cards and Koufax rookies and Clementes. And so I always knew those cards, man. That was my pinnacle that I one day wanted to get to. So, when I got back in the hobby, I busted open I busted up at a hobby box in a local card shop, and I was the only dude in there that day. And I was opening them up, and the guys he wanted me to open them in front of him. He wanted to see if I got any big hits, because I explained to him I hadn't opened a box in years. And I would there'd be some chrome card of some dude I ain't never heard of, a refractor. He'd explain to me that was a refractor, and he put in a penny sleeve. He was just giving me penny sleeves. But man, I'd hit a base card of a Shohei Ohtani. He's like, yeah, that's not worth much. I'm like, that's a Shohei Ohtani. He's like, no, that's not worth anything. And I was like, so I didn't really understand that. It took me a little while to figure that stuff out. But so that's why I just went back into vintage, because that's where my heart was anyways.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like for a lot of us, at least when I was a kid, like I had an appreciation for vintage, but it just seemed like it was on like this pinnacle that you could never get to, because they just like felt, I never seen a 52 Mantle, never seen like a Gaudy Babe Ruth, right? These were just like these are things in an imagination that like just didn't exist, right?
Yeah.
So that's why it's like, yeah, kind of shocking coming back as an adult that these things aren't like they're not insane, especially comparatively speaking to some modern stuff anyway.
Yeah, so that's what I like to say.
Like it was like mythology when we grew up. The stories were like a mythology, and the cards themselves. Now it feels a little bit more like playing the lottery. But I like the mythology myself.
It was, yeah. If you didn't see it at a flea market or at your card shop, you weren't going to see it. You didn't have the internet. You could see it in a Beckett. That was it,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. And Jonathan, to that analogy, I think it was Don Mattingly that was like, he came up as a young Yankee. And Tony, I know you've had some fun Don Mattingly experiences and appreciate him, but he was asked about Babe Ruth at one point when he was young and coming up, and he said, "Oh, he really exists? I thought that was just like stories that I heard. He's a real person, That's kind of like how we are with some of these cards now."
That's exactly right.
Yeah. But so, Tony, when you were on Stacking Slabs last week, I loved hearing you talk about some of the player runs that you did when you really got back into collecting, including Mantle and Aaron. And in particular, I loved hearing you talk about Jackie Robinson, some of the collecting you've done there. But to kind of set the stage a little more for what we're going to be talking about tonight, can you tell us a little bit about some of your pre-war collecting and kind of, how you've come to that and what you focused on there?
Yeah, so the pre-war, what happened with that was you kind of keep going backwards, I feel like. And so that's kind of what I talked about in Stacking Slabs. When you're younger, you kind of prospect and you look at modern cards and you try to find something that's going to be worth a lot. I guess that's what they do nowadays. We didn't do that. I think we were more, there was a time when Greg Jeffries, you thought you were going to retire on that card. But so anyways, as I got back into it, the 50s and 60s, I knew all those cards by heart, and so you see them over and over again. And I'm not saying it gets boring, but it is what it is, right? And so when I was in the YouTube, like discovering YouTube, I happened upon this guy, Blue Jacket 66, his channel, Dave Berg. And man, he'd go on there and he would show stuff that I had never seen before. And he would get into this big, deep thing about the M101s, the 1916 cards. And he did this big thing about Cracker Jacks. And I was like, man, I'd heard of them, but I didn't really know about it. And it just became something that was kind of different and it was kind of sexy. And you just kind of, wow, it's something new. And so you start digging in. And at the same time, I started really digging into books and history, and I got into this book we're going to talk about tonight. And while reading about that, now on the audio book, the author on the audio book, it's for you guys that hadn't read it or haven't listened to the audio book. It's actually the recordings of his interviews with these players, and it's really cool to hear their voices and how old they are, and hear their stories firsthand. But he had just read a book about the 1919 White Sox and the Black Sox. And so he says that a couple of times to several of the guys. And so he would bring up Shoeless Joe Jackson and all that. And that piqued my interest, man. And so I started digging into the Black Sox scandal and Joe Jackson's story. And so then I did a playing run of Joe Jackson. I was trying to get his playing cards, which cost you a pretty penny. Yeah. So it was things like that. I wanted a Cracker Jack. So I was on an REA auction and there was this cool Cracker Jack and it was this guy named Chief Bender. And so even though I knew baseball history, I wasn't that in depth in it. I didn't know who Chief Bender was, man. So I get this card just because he has the pillbox hat on. It's really cool looking. And so I buy it. It's a decent price because it's authentic altered. Somebody trimmed it 100 years ago. It wasn't trimmed to make it look better. And so I win it on this auction and I read the back of it. And he was an American Indian. He went to the Carlisle School of Indians. And I knew that was Jim Thorpe's school. So all of a sudden, all these pieces are falling into place. So then I read his book, Chief Bender's Burden. And so now I'm digging into Chief Bender and I did a Bender run. So yeah, I went on a bender. So all that kind of stuff, it all kind of came together. So that's a long-winded answer for your question, but that's the story behind it.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah, and go ahead, Nate.
No, go ahead, Matthew. Sorry.
I was going to say, I think that, it's a really good precursor to the conversation tonight, and that, in terms of nerding out on vintage cards, you can't go to YouTube, and watch these people play, right? These older players, you have to access them somehow. And at least, for me, it's been just the companionship between, the cards and then books that carry you through some of these stories. It just kind of brings it alive, especially if you've got one of those strong imaginations where you can just kind of see it kind of playing out in your head, right? It just makes, and then you've got this card in your hand, you're like, oh, holy smokes, it's like you're there, right?
Yep.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, right. And, obviously the baseball documentary by Ken Burns is a big place that a lot of us start and is real sort of foundational with that early turn of the century. Obviously, it runs through a long period, but that really does a great job of kind of, hitting on that and also talking to some of the players, and the musical selections even are great. Mm-hmm. So that's one of those really foundational things. And then I think the book that we're going to talk about tonight is one that if you're collecting pre-war, you kind of got to spend the time and either read it or listen to it or both. So with that, should we go ahead and jump into it, or? Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. All right. So the book, we've shown it, but it's The Glory of Their Times, written by Lawrence Ritter. And it was, we got also, it was published in 1966. And Larry, as the ball players called him, had the idea for the book in 1961 when Ty Cobb passed away. And he had the thought that, well, hey, here's a guy who's really represented baseball, and we just lost him, and we're on the verge of, and we might lose a lot of this history from these guys that played at this fascinating period that really popularized what became America's pastime. And so he said, well, I want to do something about that. And he decided to embark on this project that became a book. And the way he did it was the book is broken out. The original publication is broken out into 22 chapters, which is each a piece a piece that derives from an interview that was conducted by Larry Ritter of a baseball player from the turn of the century period. It was republished and expanded in 1984 to add 4 later guys. So in total now, as long as you get the later edition, it's 26 interviews that became chapters. And what Ritter did was he researched the old ball players to figure out who was still alive at that time in the early 60s. And then he would write the players a letter, back when we used to write letters. And he'd try to track these guys down. He'd usually follow up then with a phone conversation and see if he could find out where they were, spread around the United States, and if they were willing to do, sit down and do an interview with him. And as we were talking about beforehand here, Ritter was actually a finance professor at NYU at the time, and he had this passion for baseball. Like so many of us, it was ignited by his dad when he was a kid. His dad had grown up around the dead ball era and had shared stories with him about Cobb and Wagner and a lot of those guys. And, so that was kind of the initial connection. Grew up in New York City, New York guy. I'm not sure if he rooted for the New York teams or not, but there certainly is some focus on that in the book, on, some of the old New York Giants players in particular. So I'm guessing that wasn't, purely coincidental. So then, after he tracked down these guys and get them to agree to do the interview, he drove around the country, and he estimated that he put about 75,000 miles on his car, driving from one coast to the other and back several times to find these guys and track them down and get them to sit with him and talk. And so, what he did essentially was to, preserve firsthand the stories of these guys that played in the early 1900s. Some of them even started in the late 1800s and then up through, kind of the 1920s. And, really what comes out more than anything is just the, as we've hit on, the tremendous storytelling. And, that was kind of the format that he used to get across and to preserve the history. Guys, what did I miss in terms of foundational elements with the book?
I think you got it pretty good. One thing that I like about the book is that there's some conversation in the chat here about we're getting a lot of pickup. Let me see if I can deal with that.
Turn your gain down a little,
yeah.
Or your volume maybe.
Yeah. All right. I don't know. So we got a lot of discussion in the chat about the audiobook and how the audiobook relates to the actual book. And what's cool in the actual book is that, it's not like Larry's retelling the story. Like each chapter is written in the first person as though it's just the text of what was said in the conversation. So it's kind of like immediately kind of puts you in the room, even if it's not the audiobook, which I would imagine, in the 1966 when the book came out would have been like pretty powerful and cool, right?
Yeah. I think the actual audiobook came out, and tell me if I'm wrong, originally on a vinyl. I think you could buy the vinyl and play it on your record player.
Oh, that's cool.
So when you read the book, if you listen to the audio book and then you read the book, you can see where he took that interview and he made it more congruent and he made it kind of make sense. So it's not just he's asking a question, he gets an answer. He takes the answers and he kind of intertwines it into a first person recount, even though that isn't exactly how they said it in the order they said it, but it makes sense the way he does it.
I'll tell you, for me, what was one of the most amazing things about reading the book. First of all, these storylines that are introduced in the early interviewees thread throughout, and many of the other people see it and tell the same stories from other points of view. But these super minute details are corroborated by all of the other people. Not just like who was as bad and who made this critical error, this amazing play, but people will remember the details of he wasn't actually supposed to start the game. It was going to be the other guy, but he was out for one reason or another. And then when you listen to some of the audio, you realize how later in life these guys were, and it makes you realize just the passion for the game and for the stories. And they might not remember what they had for breakfast yesterday, like I often do, but they could remember exactly what their batting average was, in 1912, and who else's batting average was, and how the standings ended and things like that.
Yeah, and there's a common thread too. Like Larry keeps bringing up to him. So, what do you think about today's players? And how about if they have a hangnail, they sit out a week, and they're like, yeah, we were tougher back then. And I can't remember which one it was. I think it was Joe Wood. He talks about they made a liniment out of Vaseline and Tabasco sauce.
That was Crawford.
Was it Crawford? Okay.
Right.
Rub it on whatever ailed them. And I mean, dang, dude, they were crazy tough, So yeah, that's the thing, the thing that kind of shone through for me in today's world. People, if you post a stat of Ty Cobb, there's going to be this one dude who's going to, he couldn't play his today's game. The guys were throwing 80 miles an hour. Of course he hit 480 or whatever. Well, you know what my question is? I don't think today's player could play back then, because those guys didn't have locker rooms. They didn't have trainers. They didn't have nutrition. They had to take the long train rides. I mean, all the stuff these guys dealt with, and rowdy fans. I mean, fans would run on the field and punch the umpire. You had boy umpire. When you were running the bases, people would grab your clothes if the umpire wasn't looking, or they hip check you and throw you off balance and you'd stumble and fall. I mean, you can't do that stuff today. You got 4 umpires, sometimes 6 in the playoffs. So it was a whole different game, and you had to be a different type of dude to play it. And to play it, you were looked down upon. Like, guys talked about how their wives, his in-laws wouldn't allow her to date him because he was a baseball player, and they were scum of the earth. So you start realizing what a different world it was back then. Now, man, if your daughter wants to date some dude that has a major league future, like, man, she might be freaking rich one day, So it's a whole different attitude, So
yeah. Who was the guy? It was like his dad was like the chief engineer of the city of Cleveland or something.
Drew Marquardt.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And he wanted to become a ball player.
Right. He didn't talk to him for about 15 years. Right? After he became a ball player, because he was so disappointed in him. But yeah.
Probably as an old man came to the clubhouse, and the clubhouse guy said, hey, there's this old guy outside that says he's your dad and he wants to talk to you. He said, my dad wouldn't walk across the street to talk to me. And he came in there and they hugged, and until his dad died, they had a relationship again. But yeah, that whole time he was a major leaguer. Yeah, it's crazy to hear those stories, man.
Yeah, it really drives home how much times have changed, even to the 60s from the early 1900s, much less now when it's just as much a whole different world from the 60s as it was, then to the 1910s or whatever. But Jonathan, we've started to get into it a little bit, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about, kind of why this book resonated so much with you. I think you could potentially take the view that, well, it's an bunch of old guys talking about an old era. This is probably going to be a snooze fest, right? Like, these guys are out of touch and they don't know what they're talking about. But why was it not that for you?
Yeah, I definitely didn't expect it to be the page turner that it was. But even from a stepping back in my collecting journey, for me, collecting vintage cards has always been about the stories. I often say, I think collectors tend to be storytellers. And my vantage point was sort of the lens of my father, who grew up in the 1950s. So it was sort of my way of diving into the America he grew up in, to collect Willie Mays and Mickey Mantle and all of the post-war baseball players. And I've taken the point of view that baseball history back then was kind of just American history. It was our national pastime. What was going on with Jackie Robinson? And I wasn't really interested in going back to the pre-war, talking pre-World War I period, because I didn't know the stories. I didn't really know the names. I knew, of course, who Hannes Wagner it was and Ty Cobb, but suddenly this book just turned these stories, brought them to life in a way where the characters all had these interweaving plot lines and were so likable. I'll mention a few and how it kind of brought some cards to life for me. So somebody in the comments mentioned Merkel's Boner or Merkel's Boner. This was a play, a critical error against I think it was the 1908 pennant against the Giants against the Cubs, and Merkel gets a base hit. He's kind of a nobody, barely even plays, and the guy batting behind him scores the winning run. Giants win the pennant, right? And as all of the chaos after the game, this guy Johnny Evers realizes that Merkel made a base running error, and he had to touch second, or else it was an out. And after the winning run scored, Merkel walks back to the dugout celebrating with the team. Evers is looking around screaming and gets the ball, tags second. There's a photograph of the aftermath in the game, and it's I think still considered to be the most controversial end of a game ever. Cubs went on to win the pennant. And it just brought this card to life for me, my Johnny Evers card. There were all kinds of wacky stories about just, what a different game it was back then. One tale of 3 guys ending up on third base at the same time because of a base running error. There was another one where somebody wanted to do a double steal, first and third, and the catcher didn't throw the ball. So after I think it was Germany, Schaefer steals second base, he's like, let's try it again, and he steals first base from second. Yeah, I mean, that was like such an endearing story, and everyone's looking around like, wait, can you do that? Are you allowed to run from second to first?
Yeah.
But the one that really got me, and I reread it today, was a story about these two guys. I'm showing up my 33 Gaudi, Goose Goslin and Heine Manouche. It was the last game of the season, and these guys were battling it out for the batting title. I think they were both. It came down to the very last at bat of the game by Goslin. I think he was on 378 and a fraction. Manouche is in the outfield of the same game on 378, and Goslin's trying to decide whether or not to take the at bat, because if he takes the at bat and gets an out, he doesn't win the batting title. He's never won it before. If he just sits it out, he wins the title. Eventually, his teammates kind of encourage him to take the at bat, or he doesn't want to be called a chicken. So he goes up to bat, quickly gets 2 strikes against him, and he decides to try to get kicked out of the game. So he turns to the opposite person and mad and says, "So right." And apparently, he claimed that they argued for about 5 minutes, and the ump turned to him and said, "There's no way I'm kicking you out of this game, so you're going to go back to the plate." Goslin ended up, he said, getting a fluky hit. He won the batting title, but it was just such a well-told story. And all of these little tales, it wasn't really necessarily just the exploits of the greatest players, the Babe Ruths and the Ty Cobbs, but it was kind of the antics of the game. I think the camaraderie of the players and all of these little stories that won me over. And after reading it, I went to the National this last year and bought my first T206 cards. And, now I'm truly a pre-war collector.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Nate, I know that it's had a big impact on your collecting too, right?
It has. Yeah, for sure. I read it last year as well. And I had already, kind of gone pretty heavily into pre-war, but this really accelerated and kind of refocused me even further in that area. And yeah, Jonathan, I think, you gave a good description kind of just why it was so powerful. And it was, the little anecdotes and just the beauty of the storytelling. It's, baseball, not baseball, whatever. It's just life. And if there's a powerful story that you just connect with and that makes you happy and makes you understand humanity a little bit better, like you just feel great about that. And it's just fascinating. And so it's just some of the best storytelling that I've come across in any aspect of human life, much less sports. And, so to get that and to have that interspersed with kind of what we do as collectors, has had a big impact on me. And one of the things in reading it that just an example, like I really just love the way they talked about Honus Wagner in the book, and the reverence that everyone seemed to have for him, not only as a player, but also as a person. And it was just like these guys just, even if they were his contemporaries and his peers, but they just looked up to him because he was just such a specimen on the baseball field and such a great guy and a great leader. And, you just feel that love that they all had for him. And so that kind of inspired me this past year to finally take the leap and get my first couple Wagner cards. And then also, I started a little Glory of Their Times kind of side project that I'm working on, which maybe I'll talk about that a little bit later, but want to get into a couple of other things first. But yeah, definitely very much deepened my passion and my focus on pre-war. So yeah. So Matthew, bringing it back to you, maybe, can you give us kind of some of your impressions and maybe in particular to drive home the point, talk about one of your favorite chapters and why you connected with that one, maybe more so than some of the others?
Sure. So the chapter that really stuck out to me was the Sam Crawford chapter, because Sam Crawford just like he can tell a story, man. He's like Tony. Right, like Tony can tell a freaking story, and I feel like it's the same way with Sam Crawford, and like right away I was reading the chapter, and I'm like, dude, I gotta get a card of this guy. So what I'm showing here on the screen is this is a 1909 E102 Sam Crawford. So you can see here Crawford, Detroit, center field, Detroit American League. I think this is commonly called the set of 25 because there were 25 players, and I think it's it's an E series, so it's a candy series card. But Crawford, the whole story with Crawford stands out cool because like Larry had a hell of a time of tracking him down, right? So like you said, Nate, he kind of knew where these guys lived, and I think he ends up finding Crawford's wife in Hollywood, and Sam Crawford's not there, and he's like begging his wife to like give him information, and she's super reluctant, and she ends up telling him somewhere 175 to 225 miles north of Los Angeles. So this guy's Larry's got nothing else to do, so he just drives north out of Los Angeles. And I live in Southern California, so obviously very familiar with the area. And the story is that, he's kind of like finding these little kernels of information about where Sam Crawford is. Like he's talking to real estate agents, various people who somehow interacted with him. And I guess Sam Crawford had been leaving his kind of business card around, which said like Sam Crawford, like Baseball Hall of Famer or something like that. So people kind of knew roughly where he was. And he ends up in a town called Baywood. Yeah, I think it's Baywood City, California. Which is a really small town, Baywood Park, California, which is a really small town in San Luis Obispo County near kind of Morro Bay, if you're familiar with that. It's a very pretty part of California. And he ends up there, and he cannot track Sam Crawford down, and he's about to give up, and he goes to a laundromat to like just do his clothes and like head out of there. And as he's in the laundromat, like he sees this old, gaunty, tall guy walk in. And then he ends up tossing his load of laundry in next to this guy. And he's like, hey, by chance, do you know Sam Crawford? Does he live around here? And I think Sam Crawford's answer was something like, well, I should know him because I am him, or something like that, right? And so he runs into Sam Crawford as a freaking laundromat. And, they end up, going back to Sam's house. And I think they actually became pretty good friends at the end of Sam's life. So the chapter with Sam Crawford is just awesome. And just to give a line out of it here that I thought was really funny is like, he's talking about how he's basically a recluse. And he says, heck, I don't even buy a newspaper. Nothing but trouble in it. Just spoils your day. You get up in the morning, feel pretty good, get a hold of a paper, and what do you see? Nothing but trouble. Big headlines about bombs and war and misery. It ruins the day. That's the way I look at it anyway. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. So, he's like this old kind of cantankerous guy, but he talks about all the books that he's reading and the stories that he relays to Larry about all these other characters, in baseball are just amazing. And maybe one other line that I just like die when I'm reading it is when, or actually this is, yeah, when he's talking about Rube, when he's talking about Rube Waddell, and he says that one of the strategies to deal with Rube Waddell is like just don't get him mad, just like keep him happy. And so one of the strategies that was invoked by Huey Jennings, which was the manager at Detroit, was to like go to a nickel and dime store before the game and buy like a bunch of little toys. And then when Rube's up there pitching, like take the toys out and like show them to Rube. And then Rube would like look over and like start laughing. And then he would kind of get lackadaisical about his pitching. And so like, I mean, and stories like that are just like amazing. And the way Crawford tells them, and if you listen to the audio book, it kind of sounds like my grandpa. Like that's who I'm picturing is like, kind of a version of my grandpa in the way that he talks. And the last story that I'll say that I really loved about the Crawford chapter is when he talked about, so he was born in 1880 and they kind of played baseball in their town. He grew up in Wahoo, Nebraska. So that's why he's called Wahoo Sam. And they used to like get like kind of the team together in Wahoo, and they would get on just a wagon and they would just drive out, wagon train to the nearby town. And they had a guy with them that was a cornet player, and he would sound the cornet, when they arrived in the town, and then town people would come out and then, have a baseball game, and it would be like wandering. You can just imagine this group of like 16-year-olds, like in a wagon train in Nebraska, wandering around to like play other baseball teams. It sounds so, it sounds mythical, right? It doesn't seem real that would happen, and this was, 125 years ago or so, but it's just, I can't say enough about how wonderful that chapter is. And, it makes Sam Crawford, just a character, and it just comes through in the way that he talks, and his stories are just fantastic. And there's so many elements to his chapter that really stand out that like, as I'm reading it, I'm like, how can I get, closer to him? Right. And the way that I can do that, right, is through cards. And so, I know Tony, I think you've got like a Cracker Jack of his, which I'd love to get one day. I have, this candy card and, got my eye on some other ones. But every time I see this card, it's not like I can go to a YouTube video and watch Sam Crawford, hit a triple. Right. But I can like listen to his voice in this amazing recording that Larry made. So that's a chapter that really sticks out that to me is like, possibly the best of the book because it's so well done.
One more thing about that chapter that I loved, and I agree, it was maybe my favorite chapter, one of my top two. Yeah. And kind of a theme that flows through the chapter was there's this tension between Crawford and Ty Cobb, teammates. I think Cobb kind of surpassed Crawford in fame at the time, but there was against one of the great pitchers of the game, Walter Johnson. Ty Cobb couldn't seem to hit Johnson, and for whatever reason, Sam Crawford always did really well against him. And I've been meaning to look up the stats to see if this is validated, but as Crawford tells the story, Walter Johnson liked him. So as long as it wasn't a tight game, the catcher would say like, "Hey, Walter likes you today," and he would just pitch him soft right down the middle and let Crawford get on base, kind of just to bug Ty Cobb. So you're hitting this guy. I can't seem to beat him. And I just thought that was so funny that, there's some camaraderie even against the opposing pitchers just to get under Ty Cobb's skin.
Well, Walter Johnson loved Sam Crawford's bats. So he would go in the clubhouse and Sam would give him a bat. And so they got to be buddies that way. So to pay him back, he'd throw him some meatballs. That's kind of crazy.
Yeah. Very awesome.
Yeah, and Sam was one of the many guys in there that talked about how great Walter Johnson was. It was fun to hear how those guys would talk about him. They talked about his arms, like they would hang down to his, past his knees. He had big, long arms, and they couldn't believe how fast he threw. So who was the one that had the first at bat against Walter Johnson that talked about his debut? That wasn't Crawford.
It was. I think it was in the Crawford chapter. He talked about the debut. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. That was really neat too, because, Johnson came in as this unknown. Everyone was, we didn't. Now you have these top 25 prospectly, we know who these guys are from the age of 16 or whatever. And, they're coming in and it's a big deal. But then he was this, fresh kid in off the train from Idaho, and nobody knew who the heck he was. And all of a sudden he's throwing harder than anyone has ever seen before. And so hearing the initial impressions of that was pretty cool. But here's a Crawford card that I picked up after
nice
book, which is the American Caramel card that's got one of the nice sunsets that those candy cards tend to feature. So, all right.
Yeah, I think one better
than mine.
Yeah, and I also had to go out and get this one.
Oh, there.
I love that chapter, man. And so, yeah, I agree, man. That's my second favorite chapter.
Yeah,
thinking about in that wagon train. I mean, they would stop along a stream and just camp out and sleep under the stars and take baths in the water and wash their uniforms. I mean, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. Can you see Shohei Ohtani doing that when he was 16 years old? I mean, he might have. We don't know, but I'm just saying it was a different breed, man. Those guys ate it and drank it and loved it, or they would have done all that.
Yeah, and that was the other thing too that came across in the book, right? I think going back to what you're saying earlier, Tony, like, like they were doing it for the love of the game, right? There wasn't all of the, it wasn't like it is today. It was really like you were considered a ruffian, right? And you played because you loved it, right?
Yeah. If they go in and eat at restaurants and couldn't get anybody to serve them, they'd set them in the very back of the restaurant so nobody'd see baseball players were there. Nowadays, baseball player, you get to skip everybody in line and sit in the front so everybody can see you're there.
Yeah, eat for free. Yeah. Well, so Tony, you said the Crawford chapter was probably your second favorite. Why don't you? What was your first favorite chapter?
Well, my first favorite was Joe Wood. So I had never heard of this guy, and I read the book, and I'm in awe of what he did. So there's all kinds of different things. So the very first part of it, just to give you a sense of the time, he was born in 1890. So that's a long time ago. Mm-hmm. And he talks the very first part. He remembers growing up in Denver, Colorado, or that vicinity. And he was in the mountains though, and seeing a wagon like in the old Western movies. And it'd be a dude on a stagecoach with his rifle, and they would be bringing the gold down from the gold mines. And he said, like in the Western movies, they're always running, but it'd be a 6-horse team in front of this carriage, and it wasn't running. I never seen them do more than a trot, but I remember seeing them sitting up there with their rifles. So that kind of timed it. And then he talks about his dad was a lawyer of all things, and they did some bad land deals and got poor. And they were living in Kansas at the time in a place called Nest City. And when he was 16 years old, he was playing on the Nest City town team. And this group of girls came through, and it was kind of like it was called the Bloomer Girls. There was the Western Bloomer Girls. There was the Midwest Bloomer Girls. There was the National Bloomer Girls. But it was kind of like, it wasn't really a sideshow because they really played baseball, but they would usually have a couple of guys on the team. And so they come through, and he played against them and did really well. I think he played shortstop and pitched. And so after the game, the guy that ran the Bloomer Girls came to him and asked him if he would play the next 2 or 3 weeks with them. And so that was the first gig he ever had as a paid baseball player. And he asked his dad if he could go. He was 16. His dad's like, sure. And, but they were going to pay him $20 a week. And he was making like $3 a week doing odd jobs. So that led me to buying this Bloomer Girls postcard. It's a 1910 Western Bloomer Girls postcard. And it's not post dated, doesn't have any writing on or anything like that. But I saw this in an auction, and I was like, man, I got to have it. I think I paid $20 for it.
Oh, man.
But in the audiobook, talking about how it's different, in the audiobook, he actually says the Bloomer Girls would go in and they put posters up everywhere and try to get people to their games. And then he also said, and while they were there, they would sell postcards. So I bought this postcard. There's a little guy right there. Let me see if I can get it. And Joe Wood wasn't a tall guy. I thought, man, that might be Joe Wood in that picture. Wouldn't that be awesome? but it's not. So anyways, and then that led me to getting now this is one of my prized possessions. I saw this on eBay and I could not believe I saw it on eBay, and I bought it right away. It's a signed Cracker Jack 1915 Joe Wood Cracker Jack card. There's only like 5 Cracker Jack cards signed in both sets, and he signed that bad boy. So it's got a big Cracker Jack stain on it. But it's a 15. You can tell by it's upside down. So more about Joe Wood. So he gets on that team, and then the next year he signs with a team out of Hutchinson, Kansas, and I think it's the Western Association. Lights out that year, won 20 games, struck out 200 people. Then he gets picked up by a team in the American, so he keeps moving up. And somehow the Boston Red Sox figure out about him. I wrote this date down. But in 1908, he's playing for Kansas City in the American Association. Midway through the year, the Boston Red Sox buy his contract. He goes to Boston. He's a pitcher. He's throwing gas. So he talks about it in the book that him and Walter Johnson were the 2 hardest throwers. Dude could have been Walter Johnson. In fact, in 1912, he went 34 and 5, and they won the World Series. He won 3 games, lost 1 game in the World Series. They won the World Series. He was the toast of the town. And in the middle of that season, Walter Johnson that season had won 16 in a row. He had lost before he got to Boston, but they built it up like a prize fight. So they had advertised. He said they advertised where they had big biceps and triceps and all this other stuff on the pictures. And he said that in the book and when he's talking on the audiobook, he said it's the only time he's ever seen this. This was the first year that Fenway Park had been built. First year, 1912. He said they put people on the field all the way up to the foul lines. And I'm trying to imagine this, like, and then you look in the book, that's him trying to get loose before the game.
That's crazy.
I mean, that's the wall. The bullpen was down the side then, and there's people between him and the field, and he could hit somebody. That's how many people were crowded into Fenway Park that day. So it was a prize fight, and he beat Walter Johnson 1-0 that day. And so, and then that was his 11th, that was his 12th win. And he went on to win 16 in a row and tied Walter Johnson's record and lost his 17th. So I think he still owns, both of them still own that record. So he the next year, though, shoulder problems. He would pitch. He couldn't lift his shoulder for like 2 weeks, and he kept trying to get through it. Finally had to quit. But he was there when Babe Ruth showed up. So that was another little connection. He talks about Babe Ruth coming in as this green guy that had never been out of an orphanage. And, you know, you read Babe Ruth's book, he would get in the elevator and ride it up and down just because he thought it was cool, like a little kid. And he said, yeah, back then he didn't drink, but he was already chasing the women. So, he's telling all these behind the scenes. So it was really cool. He reinvents himself. After sitting out for 2 years, he became really good friends with Tris Speaker, and they were roommates in Boston. They came in at the same time, and Tris ended up going to Cleveland. So because of his arm trouble, he had the connection with Tris Speaker. He ends up going to Cleveland and reinvents himself as an outfielder and hit like 360 one year. And in 23? Yeah, 23, he gets an offer to be the coach of Yale. And they pay him the same amount he was getting paid as a baseball player with the Indians. And he did it. Now, here's what was cool about it. He did it for the right reason. His kids were little, and he would be on the road for all this time playing major leagues, and he wanted to watch his kids grow up. So he went, and he wanted to settle down, and he got to be a good dad, and he got to coach baseball, and he stayed in it and until 1942, until he retired. So he was a baseball lifer. He loved it. He mentioned several times, like, I would have done it for free. And but what was funny about it was he talks about when he was a pitcher, he was the star, and then when I was an outfielder, You can hear it when I was the outfielder, I was a regular player then. But oh yeah, he kind of felt it, and he compared himself to Mantle too. He's talking about Mantle. If he wouldn't have had all the injuries, I was the same way, and so yeah, it was wild to hear this guy from the pre-war compare himself to a guy that we all know about. So yeah, I really loved the chapter. It was really cool.
That's great, man.
No,
yeah.
There were a couple of guys in the book that had that sort of reinvention from a pitcher to a really impressive batter. I think maybe Lefty O'Doul might have been the other one. Or, I don't know. There was a bunch of them, but Joe Wood, he was a great storyteller. And I know there's at least one person in the chat and myself as well who have that Crackerjack Joe Wood is one of our top cards that we would love to get. It's also just beautiful artwork on that
It
card.
is. It's great. Yeah.
And it's amazing. He had that issue with his shoulder. It's remarkable to me that there are so many of these guys that were able to, especially the pitchers from back then. And I know they weren't throwing as hard as they are now, but whatever they were throwing 90 or, but the number of innings they would chew up, the amount that they would throw, that there weren't more Joe Woods that, had, and maybe there were, and their stories just aren't as known, but that guys like Walter Johnson and Mathewson and Cy Young and Grover Alexander, those guys were able to get with where medicine was at that time. Because, I don't know what exactly it was. I think they probably called it dead shoulder or something with Joe Wood. But nowadays, would they be able to do a surgery and resuscitate his career? And, maybe he'd miss a year, but then he'd be back pitching again. But, it's just another element where, it's not just the toughness, but the durability that those guys somehow had back then without any benefit of modern medicine is pretty crazy.
Yeah, when he went to Cleveland, he thought he had healed. He thought he was fine. And he gets there and he can't pitch. And so it was during World War I, and they didn't have a lot of players, so they gave him a chance to play outfield. And he said he felt all this pressure. He had to play good, and he did. So he won his spot. So it was a really cool story.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Well told there. And, so we have these 26 chapters of ball players kind of telling their own stories, and to varying degrees, they talk about their own story versus the stories of of their contemporaries. And, I think it's equally interesting really to hear, their first person accounts of themselves, but then also to get their impressions of the guys that they played with and some of the other folks in the league. And then even in some instances, again, these interviews were 1962 to 1966, so they interspersed, and, Tony, I think you referenced this, but they interspersed some references and comparisons to what were then the modern players in the, the 50s and the 60s. So beyond the kind of, most compelling chapters that you guys found, Matthew, was there anyone that stood out that you found particularly interesting that some of the folks that were interviewed talked about?
Yeah, so what I really liked when I was watching it or when I was reading it was it seemed like there was a lot of references to modern day players, and in a way also that wasn't hey, this person they're soft these days, they can't play very well. You might expect that would have been the reaction, but in particular, both chapter 9, which is the Al Bridwell chapter, and then chapter 10, Harry Hooper, both of those guys talked about this dude. So what I'm showing up on the screen there is a 1951 Bowman Willie Mays. And let me just read to you what was in the Bridwell section. So this is the very first paragraph. It's yeah, there were a lot of great ball players in my day, no doubt about that. But there are a lot of great ball players today, too, no doubt about that either. Take Willie Mays. I've seen Speaker, Cobb, Hooper, all the great outfielders, but I've never seen anyone who was any better than Willie Mays. Maybe just as good, but definitely not better. Mays can throw, field, hit, run anything. He can work a pitcher into losing a ball game anytime he gets on base. Of course, Cobb was a better hitter, but Mays, I don't know. There's just something about him. And then he kind of goes on to talk about, how amazing Willie Mays was. Then you go to the next chapter, which is Harry Hooper. And first, right away, he's that Willie Mays, he's one of the greatest center fielders who ever lived. You can go back as far as you want. Name all the great ones. Speaker, Eddie Roush, Max Carey, Earl Combs, Joe DiMaggio. I don't care who you name. Mays is just as good, maybe better. He's a throwback to the old days. A guy who can do everything and plays like he loves it. So, like, I love that. Like, you know, obviously Mays is playing right at this time, right? This is the early 60s. You know, Mays is probably like mid-career, right? At this point, you know, he's been in the league 10 years. And, you know, all these old players who, you know, are undoubtedly white players, you know, they're all calling out the fact that, you know, if Willie Mays, you know, he was someone who would be easily capable of playing in their era. And I think that, like, when I was reading it, that really struck me as like something powerful and cool, that they didn't just feel like protective of their era, but they recognized the immense talent that Willie brought to the field.
It was cool how much it seemed that Willie was distinctly separated from the pack of contemporary players for the ones they were mentioning. It's interesting that as we look back, Mickey Mantle was the guy. Like from that set you're even showing, the 51 Bowman Mantle is like that's the card, and then hey, Mays is also cool. But it was interesting to see all of these, you know, the original stars of the game, that for them Mays was the real talent.
That was, Jonathan. That struck me too. And I actually did a little bit of research because of that, and wanted to see kind of when, you know, sort of those two guys in particular, because there was very little talk of Mantle in the book, right? But many of them referenced Mays. And so Mantle's, his production and his abilities and his numbers had really kind of trailed off by that point. But from 1962 to 1966, for 5 years in a row, Willie Mays had led the league in WAR. So he was at a point when these guys were being talked about where he was really, really peaking. And then the other guy that I felt like they talked about a lot and really gave, you know, a lot of credit to was Sandy Koufax. And that 62 to 65 period was when he was winning 3 Cy Youngs. So they were very much kind of focused on the guys that were really actually dominating the league. So if those interviews had happened maybe 5 or 6 years earlier, it might have been more Mantle, you know, and it might have been some of the other guys. So
if it was 1961, maybe they'd be talking about Maris and Mantle.
And also, Larry, if you listen to the audiobook, he asked them about those particular players too. And I think he wrote it in a way into the book where it didn't really come across that. But he would ask them, like, what do you think about Willie Mays? You know, you think he could play today? And then when he would write the book, he would kind of make it sound a little different. It was kind of like leading the witness kind of thing. So I think that played into it too. It was top of mind with him.
Yeah. No, yeah. And that's, you know, it was interesting, Matthew. I felt like you got a little bit of a split with some of the guys that were interviewed in terms of some of them were pretty, you know, very willing to give the modern greats their credit. And some of them were pretty reluctant, right? And kind of like, well, you know, I don't know. Our guys were a lot tougher and, you know, just knew the game better and lived the game and felt it. These guys now are, you know, they're making all this money and, you know, they're not as like genuinely into it in the way that, you know, they're kind of mollycoddled a little bit, you know?
Yes. I think another thing that came across too was that, you know, they just talked about the game just being a lot different, right? I really loved that there was a lot of discussion of like kind of the gamesmanship, like the strategy that you had to be a quick thinker when you were playing in those days, or somebody would get one over on you, right? Because there's only one ump, or, you know, whatever, all of this kind of stuff. And that was another interesting aspect too. Just the game itself was just quite a bit different.
Yeah.
And they really about the manager styles too. Like John McGraw was mentioned all the time. They held, and him and Connie Mack, they were the two guys that were always talked about in their strategy and the thing behind the game. So yeah, that dead ball era was played a whole different way than what it is today.
Yeah. So Tony, who stood out for you that the interviewees discussed that you found particularly interesting?
So what piqued my interest was, you know, there were different players that was coming up. You had Walter Johnson continuously coming up. You had Honus Wagner and then Ty Cobb. Those were the three guys there, and Babe Ruth. if they were around during that time, they all thought fondly of Babe. He was a good dude. They all liked him. And it was almost like that in the 60s, even Ruth was iconic. And it was like they were trying to connect themselves to Ruth in a way. That's what I'd have done. Yeah, I remember that time I was hanging out with Babe Ruth at the bar. So, that's the kind of stuff they were doing. But Ty Cobb was the one that stuck out to me because, you hear about how he was a dirty player and he sharpened his spikes and he would, draw blood to a man. Even the guys like Crawford didn't like Cobb. Davy Jones played with him, didn't like Cobb. But even those guys defended him and said, look, he didn't play dirty. He just played to win. If you were in the base path, he was going to take you out, and he would tell you to your face. So Joe Wood talks about that he was friends with Ty Cobb off the field, and he was a good guy off the field, but on the field. And so Cobb, that piqued my interest. So then I had to go read Charles Learson's book. I wanted to find out more about Cobb. And Learson kind of portrays him as he's a misunderstood guy and all sort of stuff. But then you hear Sam Crawford's stories, and Crawford didn't like him at all. Yeah, Davy Jones didn't like him. Yeah. So they talked about one season, both of those guys started out on fire, and they were killing the ball. And Crawford and Cobb was in a slump. Cobb wouldn't even talk to him. Right. Like, he was mad. So Cobb really reminds me a lot of Michael Jordan. I mean, he is dead up Michael Jordan. He was all about winning. He was taking no prisoners. He wasn't there to be your friend. And that's the other thing. When you start hearing them talk, the guys that played with him, that Cobb had his own rules. He had the Jordan rules. And, Cobb in Learson's book, Cobb was all the time trying to tell people, I worked really hard. I outworked everybody. I made myself into a great player. I was not a natural hitter. Joe Jackson, now he was a natural hitter. And then Crawford makes sure, it's Davy Jones says, Ty Cobb was a natural hitter. He wasn't a hard worker. He wouldn't even show up at practice half the time. So, they're trying to tear down the legend that Cobb tried to build himself. So, how dichotomy, Joe Wood got to be friends with him. So he kind of took Cobb's side. So there was this back and forth, but to a man, they talked about how great he was. Although Crawford made sure and said, no, Cobb's not the greatest. Honus Wagner is the greatest. So,
right. So it is
about Cobb. So I found that really interesting.
Yeah, I remember specifically in the audio version when he's talking to Crawford, and Crawford's like relaying the story, one of the stories about Cobb kind of not getting along with everybody. And I specifically remember hearing him say like, but why? Why would it be involved? Yeah. Yeah. Like trying to say like it wasn't just us. You were being super irritating. You're being an asshole.
It was really Crawford and Davy Jones. Really, if you read their two chapters, they had pretty similar stories about disliking Cobb, and even to that exact point, like they'd say, well, when Cobb came up, didn't people really mistreat him? And like, why people treat him so bad? And they were like, well, yeah, they did mistreat him, but there were good reasons why he was mistreated because, he wanted to fight everybody. He only cared about himself. And,
and so that storytelling, when you read Charles Learson's books, he tells a lot of these stories. But when you hear Davy Jones talk about him getting in a fight with Bosch Smith, and I read about that in that book. Well, he tells the first person account of both fights. Now Cobb and Bosch Smith after that became buddies, but Boss Smith didn't take no crap. And so there's that story. And then there's the story that Joe Wood shares about, he talks about the 1911 All-Star game he played in, which was the Addie Joss tribute game, which was the first Major League All-Star game. And he talks about Cobb sliding in and Eddie Collins has the ball, but Cobb is such a magician on the bases. He somehow slid in safe. And so you hear all these stories from a firsthand account. It's really cool. It really made me want to go get some Cobb cards, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. He definitely I would say that like he and Wagner kind of like loomed large over the whole book, right? Almost every single player references them. And Yeah, I mean, I agree with you too, totally, Tony. On the like when I think of Cobb, I think of Jordan.
Yeah, he's dead up Jordan. Him and Kobe.
Right. Jonathan, I love that you talked before about the Fred Merkle story and how that kind of weaved through a lot of the discussions. Was there anyone else that that was talked about in the book that really stood out to you that we haven't hit on, or do you feel like
you guys mentioned a few of them? Another guy who was kind of a B-list player from back in the day, but Snodgrass, he was another one who had a classic error in a World Series losing team, and a lot of people talked about him. Ed Delahanty, which was a guy I'd never heard of, one of the great players of the game who tragically, while crossing a bridge, died over Niagara Falls. And a lot of people talked about Ed and the tragic thing that happened to him, and these stories weave together. And then we as collectors, what do? You're like, does Ed have any cards? And you start looking, and yeah, there are a few, and they're hard to find. But it immediately makes you want to learn more. Find out what their whole card catalog looks like, and see if there's a way in to add these guys to your collection. In some ways, reading this book, it feels like for me, it came at a time where I was almost done, in the 1940s, 1950s. First of all, becoming an expert in that area, reading a lot of books about it, learning the players, learning not just the main sets. I mean, when I got back into the hobby, I probably would have had to Google to figure out the difference between 1955 and 1956 Topps baseball, right? Now we just know, like you show us a card, we can tell you the year, we can tell you all about it. And my collection from that era is kind of in a place where I'm happy with. And now I'm super excited to kind of start from the ground level of trying to become an expert in this new era. Like Matthew, you showed one, I don't know if it was an E102 or maybe an E102. And I found a Ty Cobb card that was either E102 or E106, and I thought, I love that card. I don't know much about it. I need to learn. So I'm really excited to now learn more about the stories and the players, but also learn about all the sets, the tobacco cards and the candy cards and the caramel cards. And I think that's probably where I'll spend the next 5 years in my collecting journey, is just going deeper and deeper in that era.
Yeah.
And Jonathan, were you headed in that direction, would you say, even before reading this book, and did the book accelerate it for you?
I don't really think I was. I think there was like actual causation of reading this book and opening it up. I knew that someday, I said for years, like, I don't do tobacco cards. I hadn't bought a single one. Someday I probably will, but that day is not today. And then I read this book, and then I went to the National and I bought a bunch of them. One more that I'll show here. And suddenly I started, wanting to learn more and more and more about cards of that era. And it turned out that there was way more than I thought. I also now kind of get Wagner in a way I didn't before. We all knew that his card in T206 was the most valuable baseball card and could kind of picture it in our mind. But I didn't really understand him and his personality until I heard everybody else talk about him. So now I think I have an appropriate kind of fondness for Hannes Wagner, the way all the guys that told his story in this book do.
Yeah. Too bad all the cards are so expensive. Even if they've got on Twitch sets, they're all expensive.
Yeah, kind of like Shoeless Joe. There's no entry level playing days Honus Wagner, right? Like you got to got to straight into the deep end.
I went for the 48 leaf. That was the one I picked up at the National. Not a playing days, but at least I have one of his cards that
that's awesome.
Can put in my PC.
Yep. Yeah. Well, great stuff, guys. So maybe at this point, we move into wrapping it up, and I'll ask maybe Tony if you want to go first with any kind of final thoughts on the book and any other cards that you want to show, and just sort of wrapping up your thoughts on the discussion.
Yeah, I picked up a couple of more cards. I don't know why I'm getting feedback. That's crazy. But the one of them is this beautiful Lefty O'Doul. I mean, look how beautiful that card is. It's 33 Gaudy. But the Gaudy card, some of these, I mean, and his chapter was really cool. He was running a restaurant in San Francisco, and he would help feed homeless people on Thanksgiving and all that. And him and the author got to be really good friends. I had to pick up the Jimmy Austin card, got his Cracker Jack card. And, the other thing about him is
Beautiful.
In that famous picture of Ty Cobb sliding into third and that third baseman's up in the air that Charles Conlon took, that's Jimmy Austin. So in his story, he tells the story about Cobb's shoulder hit me in the leg and it knocked me off the base, but he wasn't being dirty. So you hear the firsthand account of that. And then here's my Fred Snodgrass. I picked this up about a month ago.
What set is that from? Is it?
It's a T206. It's a polar bear back.
Ooh, nice. The color on that is amazing.
Oh, dude, this is first. I got this on Fanatics, actually.
I love that the hands up on the bat too.
Yeah. It was that scientific baseball is what they called it, where they were trying to hit it where they ain't. So it's a whole different deal. But going back, just one more little story that I found really cool was Joe Wood was telling the story about Ray Chapman. He's the only guy that's ever got hit in the head and died in a game. And he tells the firsthand account for that because he played for the Indians and Carl Mays was pitching for the Giants that day. And just hearing it on the audiobook, you could still hear his anger about that. And he's one of the guys, I think it was him and Trish Speaker, that carried him off the field, like actually physically carried him off the field had to carry him all the way out to center field. That's where their clubhouse was. And he's talking about how he got hit in the base of the skull. And he was still mad at Carl Mays because he had said something about that day he was going to get him. He was going to get Chapman that day. And then he was mad because the ball was laying there and he was mad at the umpire. He said it was a strike. He was over the plate. He said, and there he is laying there in the dirt. So you hear a firsthand account of that story. It was pretty powerful, man. It kind of brought it to life rather than just reading it about in a book. So just another little tidbit. If you're interested in that book, I highly suggest it.
Great stuff, Tony. Appreciate it. Matthew?
No, I mean, the other thing, I really do like the chapters at the end. The Greenberg chapter is pretty cool. What's cool about it is that, they obviously talk about like the challenges he faced as he kind of neared Babe Ruth's single season home run record, right, as a Jewish player. And they, the author kind of, and Greenberg does this himself, like kind of contrasts that with some of the challenges faced by Jackie. So that chapter I thought was really fun at the end. And I think, I don't remember if it's I think it's Greenberg. He talks about Lou Gehrig and he talks about how how shy he was to meet Lou Gehrig and how he thought that, Lou Gehrig was such a stand-up guy that he's exactly the kind of person you'd want to like marry your daughter. Right. Yeah. And so, that was also a chapter that, even though it was kind of like disconnected, at least in time with respect to a lot of the other players, I really enjoyed that chapter. And I'm a big Greenberg fan, and it was cool kind of seeing him in the book too. I mean, this book is like, it's like a manna from heaven or whatever. If you love history and you're a baseball nerd, I don't know, there's nothing better than this book, right? Yeah. It's just amazing.
I agree.
Yep. Absolutely. Jonathan?
I'll show a card. So like a lot of great rock albums, nice. You want to start out with a banger. And my favorite chapter in the whole book is the first one, Rube Marquard, a young pitcher I knew nothing about. Just read. I'm not even going to tell the story. Just read the chapter. I picked this up, for a few $100 at the National this last year. It was one of the first ones I got, and it was just so fun to connect with this young pitcher who's hopping on trains, has no kind of permission to be trying out for these teams, but it was just like something out of the Sandlot.
He's Firehouse stories, incredible.
Yeah, Sun in the Night and Firehouses. It's just an amazing portrait of America and portrait of this guy. And so fun to learn about the game through that lens.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I have a couple last thoughts here as well. The first is I want to thank our mutual friend Jared, Pretty Good Sports Cards. He was the one that really inspired me to first pick up the book, and he has extolled the virtues of this book for years and has been very connected to it and enjoyed it many times over, both in written form and audio. So I want to give him a shout out. And then part of my hope here in doing this tonight is that we'll inspire some other folks to pick up the book and enjoy it and have as much fun with it as we all have. And so I want to thank the guy who inspired me at least to pick it up. And then, just picking up back on the point about influencing our collecting, the little project that I've taken on coming out of reading the book is to try to get a raw card of each of the guys that have a chapter. And I'm storing the card in the book so that every time I pick it up, I get to look at the cards too. And so one other one I've picked up is the Davy Jones standard caramel card. That was one of the chapters that I loved. He told some of the great Germany Schaefer and Rube Waddell stories. And, those were among my very favorites in the book. So he was one of the first guys that I picked up. So there's 26 chapters, and then I think there's 8 guys that are talked about that I've decided I want to get to. So it's going to be 34 cards in total. I've got like 13 or 14 of them, so probably take me a couple more years, but getting the cards and keeping them in the book. And then one of the things I've told myself is that each summer I want to try to pick up this book and maybe read the whole thing, but at least read a few chapters and, hopefully make it a part of my life, consistently going forward. It's that good that it merits rereading. And so when I do that, having a chance to connect with the cardboard that that relates to the book as well is something that I want to be able to do. And then I saw a quote that I thought was really kind of summarized the book well, which was, it's a Native American proverb, and it goes, "Tell me the facts and I'll learn. Tell me the truth and I'll believe. But tell me a story and it will live in my heart forever." And that's really what this book did, I think, for all of us, and, has done for generations of baseball fans and collectors. And, I think probably will continue to do for a long time after this. So, guys, really enjoyed the discussion. Any other final thoughts before we sign off here?
I'll say, we posed a question in the live chat. Is it the greatest baseball book ever written? I don't know the answer to that because I haven't read them all. But if there's a better one out there, please recommend it to me because this one is pretty amazing.
Jonathan, yeah, that's a good final point as well. We've had some really good conversation in the chat tonight, and maybe we take a minute here to thank and recognize the folks that have been going there. And some of the guys I've seen are Litzy Sports Cards, Mookie Chilson, TJ is online. Floating Heads,
Mike Petty.
Mike Petty, yes, absolutely, yep. And been really enjoying reading their comments and following their take on the discussion and the book as well. So thank you guys for joining here and participating. And Tony, thank you again for coming on with us. You certainly did not disappoint. It was really fun having you on.
It was fun. Thank y'all for all you've done for me, man. I wouldn't be on here right now if it weren't for you guys doing such an awesome job on Instagram.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Looking forward to seeing you in person here sometime soon. Hopefully at Strongsville, and if not there, then definitely at the National.
Awesome. I can't wait.
All right.
See you guys.
Take care, guys.
Thank y'all.
Very cool. See you. Thanks, everybody.